Mocked, underestimated, and forced to play, a young woman steps up to the piano. What follows is nothing short of extraordinary. A musical performance so powerful, it silences the room and shatters every expectation. At the grand Meadowridge Conservatory, the sun bathed the polished floors in a warm glow, filtering through the tall, elegant windows. The building exuded history. The faint scent of old leather-bound music scores, the unmistakable fragrance of lemon polish, and the slight dust of countless decades filled the air. Everything in the conservatory was designed to inspire, to nurture greatness. The walls echoed with the sound of scales being played, with the cacophony of rising talent attempting to prove themselves. But there, among the countless students, stood Lily Brooks, a 38-year-old woman with a quiet presence. Her movements were almost invisible, like the whisper of a wind that could easily be overlooked. She spent most of her days reorganizing sheet music, straightening out piano benches, and making sure the keys were tuned perfectly. She was the one who fixed the broken page, arranged the cluttered music sheets, and ensured the recital rooms were in perfect order. Lily was, in her mind, just the quiet helper, the one who supported others. And for the most part, she was happy with that. Her plain blue dress and soft-soled shoes didn't stand out. Her long chestnut hair was neatly braided, kept out of her face, and her kind eyes were often lowered as she worked, so as not to attract attention. It was the way she liked it. Unnoticed, invisible, blending into the background. The students were young and filled with vibrant energy. Some of the professors, like Mr. Whitman, the head of piano studies, gave her no more than a passing glance as he barked orders to the students, assuming she was just another assistant doing her job. Despite her role in the conservatory, Lily had never been given the chance to prove herself. The staff, the faculty, even the students who seemed to pass her by without a second thought, all regarded her as nothing more than a helper, a nameless, faceless figure behind the scenes. Mrs. Delaney, the prestigious French coach, once threw her a brief acknowledgement with a "Merci, mon enfant," but that was as far as it went. She'd never been asked to help with anything more than administrative tasks, and this suited Lily just fine. She didn't need the limelight. She didn't seek the recognition. She was perfectly content to stay behind the scenes, to remain unnoticed. But that didn't mean she didn't have dreams. Beneath her humble exterior was a well of untapped potential, a quiet force that had been honed over years of solitude, of sitting quietly at the back of every recital, of watching those who had risen to greatness while she stayed in the shadows. One late afternoon, as Lily tidied up the music sheets in the corridor near the grand recital hall, she heard the unmistakable sound of Avon, the conservatory's golden boy. He was one of the star students, a young pianist with the world at his feet. He had everything: the looks, the talent, and the support of the entire faculty. He was the one students watched in awe as he performed complex pieces with seeming ease, the one who had the backing of the best professors in the conservatory. But today, Lily heard something different. Avon was struggling. The sound of his fingers stumbling over the keys echoed through the hall as he tried to conquer Liszt's transcription of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The furious, rapid notes that were meant to soar and dance came crashing down under his trembling fingers, as if they were too heavy for him to carry. The sounds were discordant, filled with frustration. The normally confident Avon was faltering, his face pale and his brow furrowed in concentration. Lily stopped in her tracks. She recognized the piece instantly. She had played it hundreds of times, practiced it in the quiet of her home, letting its power fill her soul. Every note, every crescendo, every shift in dynamics was burned into her memory. She had been a prodigy once, a name that many had whispered in reverence, but that was before life and injury had taken her away from the stage. Her fingers tightened around the stack of sheet music she was holding. The sound of Avon's struggle stung her heart. He was a good pianist, but she could hear the frustration in his playing, the tension, the lack of control. She didn't know why she was standing there, listening. She didn't know why it hurt so much to hear him fail when she knew that she could easily help him. She wanted to step forward, to offer him the guidance that was so clearly needed. But no, she couldn't. She wasn't one of the celebrated students, not the ones who had the chance to be mentored. She was just the quiet assistant. She stood silently at the edge of the hallway, watching Evan's faltering hands as he struggled to make the piece sound the way it was meant to. She should leave, she thought. She should go back to organizing the music, just like she always did. But then something inside her stirred. Her fingers twitched, and she stood there, waiting, quietly, watching. But not for long. Not yet. The grand Meadowridge Conservatory had transformed into a palace for the night. The Scholarship Gala was in full swing, its atmosphere dripping with elegance. The tall chandeliers above glistened like diamonds, their light dancing across the faces of the guests below. Velvet drapes framed the stage, their deep red fabric giving an air of royal grandeur, while sparkling glasses of champagne caught the light, adding to the glow of the evening. Every detail, from the crisp programs in the guests' hands to the polished floors, had been carefully prepared, as if the night itself was a performance. But behind the grand stage, where the opulence of the event was hidden from view, a much less glamorous scene was unfolding. The air backstage was thick with nervous energy, tension swirling like a storm cloud. The conservatory's star pupil, Ivan, sat slumped on a bench, looking as pale as a ghost. His hands, once strong and steady, trembled uncontrollably. He had been preparing for weeks, his fingers sore from endless rehearsals, but now, in the final moments before the recital, he could barely feel them at all. "I can't," he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking as he stared down at his shaking fingers. "I can't perform. My hand, it's numb." His face was a mask of fear, unable to mask the pain that was seeping through his words. He slumped further into the bench, defeated. The scene backstage was chaos. Faculty members shouted orders and exchanged desperate glances. Mr. Whitman, the head of piano studies, marched up to Ivan, his expression a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "What do you mean he can't perform?" His voice echoed off the marble walls, sharp enough to send a chill through the room. "The Danson Foundation is here for Beethoven Liszt. They've been promised a masterpiece. Without it, they'll pull the funding." The panic in the air thickened, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ideas flew, none of them good. Some suggested canceling the performance, but that would spell disaster for the conservatory's reputation. Others proposed stalling, pretending something had gone wrong with the piano or the equipment. Some even suggested that they fake the performance, get someone to play a simplified version. But none of these plans would satisfy the high expectations of the donors, or worse, the artists themselves. Lily stood at the edges of the chaos, unnoticed amidst the storm. She had always been invisible, the quiet worker, the helper. But now, in this moment of crisis, something stirred deep within her. She could feel the weight of it, the music, the pressure, and the opportunity. Then, to her own shock, she heard herself speak, her voice soft but clear amidst the chaos. "I can play it," she said, almost as if the words came from somewhere beyond her control. Silence. The room froze for a heartbeat. The professors, who had been frantically arguing just seconds before, turned to her. Their eyes widened, and their mouths dropped open in disbelief. "You?" sneered Professor Thornton, his eyes narrowing, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. He adjusted his crooked bow tie, his wrinkled suit adding to the air of disdain. "Miss, office lady," he mocked, a slight scoff escaping his lips. "You're not even a student here. What makes you think you can play that piece?" Mr. Whitman's face hardened. He took a step closer to Lily, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're a helper, not a pianist," he hissed, his gaze filled with judgment. His eyes flashed with disbelief at the absurdity of her words. The other faculty members, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and mild contempt, didn't speak, but their thoughts were loud in the silent room. Lily, however, held her ground, her heartbeat steady, even as her hands trembled with nervousness. Her mind raced, but she didn't let it show. "If you embarrass this school, you're finished," Mr. Whitman added harshly, his words like a whip cracking in the still air. Lily's chest tightened at the threat, but she simply bowed her head once, a quiet resolve settling over her. No more words were needed. She wasn't going to run away this time. She couldn't. The crowd outside was still laughing, chatting, unaware of the storm that brewed behind the curtain. Lily's heart raced, but her mind was clear. This wasn't just about a recital. This was about her, her music, and her time to shine. She had spent years learning the piano in solitude, hidden from the world. And now, after all the years of doubt and silence, it was time for the world to hear her. With quiet determination, she walked toward the stage, the heavy velvet curtain looming in front of her like an impenetrable wall. She paused for just a moment, the cool fabric brushing her fingers. The lights behind the curtain cast a golden glow, blurring everything around her. And then the keys waited. The spotlight hit her like a warm sunrise, enveloping her in a golden glow. It was as though the universe had chosen this moment, the stage and the audience all waiting for something that had been buried deep inside for far too long. The piano, a gleaming Steinway, sat in the center of the stage, an instrument so majestic that its presence alone could command attention. It shone like a black river under the lights, the polished surface reflecting the soft, shimmering glow of the auditorium. The keys beckoned, waiting for her to breathe life into them. She adjusted the bench, with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times, before sitting down, her posture calm and poised. Her fingers, feather-light, hovered over the cool ivory keys. There was a moment of stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, her fingers descended on the keys, and the first notes rose. Soft, confident, precise. The music seemed to unfold slowly at first, like the beginning of a gentle breeze that carried the promise of something much more powerful. Gasps floated up from the crowd, as if they had forgotten to breathe. Murmurs rippled through the audience, moving like waves across the hall. This wasn't the clumsy attempt at a piano performance they had expected. No, this was something far more profound. Lily's fingers moved with impossible grace. With every note, her body seemed to lose its stiffness. The years of doubt and silence melted away, replaced by something far more beautiful. Her hands played the piano with the ease of someone who had lived and breathed music their entire life. Thunderous chords erupted from the instrument, full of passion and emotion, followed by fiery runs and silken melodies. Each phrase intertwined the fury of Beethoven's compositions with the dramatic elegance of Liszt's transcriptions, blending the two great composers into a singular voice, something alive and breathing. The crowd, once full of skepticism and laughter, was now silent. They were witnessing something that couldn't be explained. An artist hidden behind the quiet demeanor of a woman who had been underestimated for far too long. Her left hand rumbled deep bass notes, while her right hand soared through glittering arpeggios, dancing across the keys with ease and precision. The intensity of the music only grew with each passing second, as though she was lifting the weight of the entire room with every chord. The Fourth Symphony's four-note motif, a deep, resonant fate melody, sounded from her alone, filling the hall as if an entire orchestra had joined her in the performance. Her control was effortless, and yet it seemed impossible. The sheer power of the piece coming from just one person, one piano. The sound grew, building into an unforgettable climax, where the lines between the music and the audience blurred. Every single person in the room was lost in the magic of the performance, entranced by the sheer force of Lily's talent. By the time the final crashing chords reverberated through the hall, it was as though the world itself had stilled. The audience sat frozen in their seats, wide-eyed and breathless, afraid to make a sound. They were too afraid to break the magic. This moment of pure brilliance, this gift they had just witnessed. They had expected failure, They had expected laughter. What they received was something entirely different, something that could never be erased from their memory. The standing ovation came, but it was not immediate. There was a hesitant moment, a beat, as though the crowd was still trying to grasp what they had just experienced. But then it came, slow at first, and then a wave of applause as powerful as the storm that had just passed. The room was filled with clapping, tears in some eyes, smiles in others, but all of them standing, acknowledging the revelation that had just taken place. Professor Whitman sat frozen, his earlier smugness draining away like the final note of a song. His mouth hung open, and for the first time, there was genuine shock in his eyes. Mrs. Delaney, the French coach, clutched the program to her chest, her eyes wide, filled with emotion that she hadn't expected to feel. Her usual aloof demeanor was replaced by a rare look of wonderment. Professor Thornton fumbled for his glasses, muttering to himself, "Impossible." But the impossible had happened, and Lily was no longer just the assistant, the overlooked woman in the background. She was Lillian Kurtz, the pianist the world had forgotten. But no one would forget her now. For in those final moments of music, she had reclaimed what was rightfully hers, and with it, a place on the stage she had long been denied, to break the magic. Then, an explosion of applause so fierce it shook the chandeliers. The sound swelled like a wave crashing over a shore, enveloping Lily, the entire room, the very air around her. The audience rose as one, their voices a chorus of disbelief and admiration. Some were standing, clapping so wildly their hands hurt, others wiping tears away as they cheered her on. There was no room for doubt now. Lily had delivered something no one had seen coming. Mr. Whitman, whose judgment had been sharp and dismissive moments before, now stood stiffly in his seat, his face drained of all color. His lips parted, but no words came. He stared, as though trying to reconcile the quiet assistant he'd once ignored with the virtuoso before him now. Mrs. Delaney, ever the dignified French coach, couldn't hide the tears running down her cheeks. Her usual poised composure faltered as she whispered, "Bravo," into the roaring crowd, her voice thick with emotion. She stood and clapped, as if this moment was not just a revelation, but a shared experience, a celebration of an artistry she had long failed to recognize. Lily stood from the bench, the weight of the performance sinking in. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the emotion that surged through her. She glanced at the audience, misty-eyed, before bowing deeply. She felt the applause wash over her, but it wasn't the loud cheers that made her heart swell. It was the quiet realization that she had finally shown the world her true self, and in doing so, she had found her place. Mr. Danson, the famed donor whose foundation funded the evening's event, stood up from his seat. His voice rang through the hall, cracking with emotion. "The legend reborn," he shouted, his words thick with the weight of the truth he had just witnessed. The crowd fell into an even deeper silence, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from respect, from admiration. They all understood. Something extraordinary had just happened. Lily Curtis, the woman they had underestimated, had just shown them a part of her that had long been hidden, and in doing so, she had reshaped their perceptions. In front of hundreds, Lily Curtis, no longer hidden, smiled, but it wasn't for the fame. It wasn't for revenge. She wasn't playing to prove anyone wrong. It was for herself, for the quiet girl who had once believed her dreams were too distant to reach, for the woman who had spent years questioning whether she could ever return to the stage. And now she was standing in front of them, no longer silenced. The offers flooded in as expected: an artist-in-residence role at Meadowridge, invitations to teach master classes at conservatories around the world. Young students like Even, the one she had helped backstage, approached her, asking if they could learn from her, if she could be their mentor. But it wasn't the offers that mattered most. It wasn't the accolades or the recognition. As the sunset bathed Meadowridge in soft pink and gold, Lily stood quietly, her heart full. She didn't need the glittering tours of old, the fame that had once defined her career. She didn't need the applause of thousands. She was home. She would stay at Meadowridge, teaching, nurturing, and growing new musicians who had the same spark she once had. She would pass on the music that had once saved her soul, teaching others not just how to play, but how to be seen, how to give everything they had, without fear. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest symphonies inside them, and when they finally play, the world listens. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye for now.